Footage coming out of Gaza is crazy. It's coming from the IDF, it's coming from Hamas fighters, it's coming from civilians on the ground. And when you piece it all together, what it shows is that the conflict in Gaza presents a military challenge unlike anything seen before. Underground tunnels, urban warfare, non-uniformed combatants hiding weapons in civilian areas. Traditional military units just weren't designed for this. But the confrontation between Israel and Hamas has been anything but traditional. So I wanted to introduce to you 6 IDF units that show how what's going on in Gaza is both changing warfare and the IDF. We're going to take a look at female soldiers who can spot threats from miles away, infantry units that clear buildings room by room, engineers who hunt through tunnels with robots, medics who fly helicopters into active engagement zones, dogs with cameras strapped to their backs, and cyber warriors fighting an invisible campaign. So how do these diverse Israeli units fight against an enemy who is rewriting the rules of engagement? The war in Gaza really started with the Tatzpitaniot. This is like Israel's early warning system. So picture this. It's 6:30 a.m. on October 7th. Most of Israel still asleep. But in observation posts along the Gaza border, these female soldiers are staring at their screens, watching something that does not look right. These soldiers are the Tatzpitaniot, Israel's all-female combat observer units. Yeah, these units are exclusively female by design. The role was established in the early 2000s when the IDF wanted to expand female participation in operational positions. The job requires long hours of vigilance, attention to detail, and the ability to remain focused in high-stress environments. Skills that female soldiers proved exceptionally good at, no comment. Over 2 decades, the Tatzpitaniot developed such a strong reputation that the IDF kept the units all female. So for the months leading up to October 7th, some of these observers had been issuing warnings about unusual activities along the Gaza border. They had spotted Hamas conducting training exercises, attempting to obstruct surveillance equipment, and preparing for something big. But despite these alerts, the higher-ups didn't act decisively on the information. Some argue the warnings went unheeded because of a gender bias. But whatever it was, the failure to act on the warnings of the Tatzpitaniot will go down in history, because on October 7th, Hamas launched a coordinated strike, breaching multiple points along the border. At one of the observation posts where the Tatzpitaniot were stationed, soldiers lost their lives and 7 were taken captive. The observers who survived stayed at their posts, continuing to report enemy movements even as they came under direct fire. An internal IDF investigation later acknowledged that while some intelligence personnel and observers had correctly assessed Hamas's preparations, their warnings were not adequately heeded. No duh. Today, the Tatzpitaniot are still at it, but things have changed. The IDF has rebuilt and upgraded the surveillance infrastructure that was destroyed during the attack, with renewed emphasis on taking their warnings more seriously at the command level. And so the Tatzpitaniot are out there monitoring advanced camera systems, surveillance balloons, and drones along the border, always preparing for Hamas's next move. Israel responded to the October 7th attack with weeks of intense airstrikes, but airstrikes alone can only do so much. The goal of Israel's campaign was to bring back the 240 kidnapped Israelis and end Hamas's rule in Gaza so that yet another war wouldn't eventually end up needing to be fought. And to do that, they needed boots on the ground. Israel deployed all of its standing army infantry brigades to Gaza: Golani, Givati, paratroopers, Nahal, Kvir, and the elite commando brigade. But I want to focus on Golani because they've got a great history that explains why they're leading these operations. Formed during Israel's War of Independence, Golani is officially known as the 1st Golani Brigade. It's one of the oldest and most decorated infantry units in the IDF. Early members included farmers and new immigrants, reflected in their brown berets that symbolize connection to the land. They've participated in every major conflict, defending northern Israel in 1948, fighting in the Golan Heights in 1967, capturing Mount Hermon in the Yom Kippur War, and even participating in the famous Entebbe rescue. But even with all that experience, they had never seen anything quite like Gaza. Imagine trying to clear a city of combatants where every building could be booby-trapped, where tunnel entrances are hidden behind false walls, and where the enemy knows every street better than you do. This wasn't about charging across open fields. This was about going building by building, room by room, constantly adapting to an enemy that had been preparing for this exact scenario for years. Golani soldiers had to develop new tactics on the fly, like how do you clear a building when there might be tunnel entrances hiding beneath you? How do you advance when every doorway could be rigged to explode? When Hamas is using a civilian building to attack you, do you send soldiers in or call in an airstrike or artillery fire? Now, the couch commanders out there might have easy answers to those questions, but in those first few months of fighting, these tactical questions quickly became moral dilemmas that reverberated across the globe, because the battle zone was filled with civilians, not by chance, but by design. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar reportedly described high civilian casualties as a necessary sacrifice for the Palestinian cause, believing that the loss of civilian lives would help Hamas more than a ceasefire. Now, the IDF repeatedly asked civilians to evacuate combat zones through leaflets, through phone calls, and of course public warnings. But for many, leaving their homes was easier said than done. Maybe they agreed with Sinwar, or had nowhere to go, or feared Hamas reprisals if they left, or feared never being allowed to return home, just as their grandparents had never returned home after fleeing fighting in 1948. And so, Golani and the other brigades faced a terrible choice between protecting Israeli soldiers and protecting Gazan civilians. The IDF insists they've done their utmost to limit civilian casualties, but Israel's critics say the exact opposite. Both sides say the toll on their side proves their point. Either way, it's clear this methodical approach of securing territory, building by building, became the foundation for everything that came after. While Gazans were exposed to countless horrors above ground, Hamas fighters were hiding underground in their extensive tunnel network. As the civilian toll rose, Hamas officials refused to allow civilians to shelter in the tunnels, saying unequivocally that the tunnels are meant to protect us, referring to Hamas operatives, not civilians. For decades, Hamas had prepared for this confrontation, digging not shelters for civilians, but hundreds of miles of attack tunnels. But Israel was also prepared. Meet Yahalom, Israel's elite combat engineers. If there's something that needs to be blown up safely and precisely, these are your guys. But the tunnel network in Gaza wasn't just a few hideouts. We're talking about hundreds of miles of interconnected tunnels, some 3 stories deep, complete with electricity, ventilation, kitchens, and launchers. And all of it was running under civilian infrastructure, residential buildings, schools, UN facilities, and hospitals. And much of it was booby-trapped. Yahalom had to figure out how to detect these tunnels, map them, and then destroy them without collapsing half of Gaza in the process. They're using things like ground-penetrating radar and specifically designed robots that can navigate through tight spaces. The work is extremely dangerous. Yahalom lost several engineers to booby traps and tunnel collapses, and the psychological burden of working underground in confined, booby-trapped spaces is immense. But piece by piece, tunnel by tunnel, Yahalom has been systematically dismantling what took Hamas years to build. Next up, Angels in Gaza, Unit 669. So here's the question. What do you do when a soldier gets wounded in Gaza, surrounded by enemy fighters, with no clear way to get them out? You call in Unit 669. These are Israel's elite combat medics. Think paramedics, except they operate under fire and their ambulance is often a helicopter flying into a hot zone. And 669 doesn't just operate in Gaza. They've built an international reputation through missions like rescuing 10 Turkish sailors caught in a severe storm and hosting the Sky Angels international rescue exercise with elite units from the US, Italy, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Canada, and the Netherlands. But in Gaza, 669 has done some incredible rescues. Over 1,800 wounded soldiers have been evacuated since October 2023, with 1,600 from Gaza alone. Landing helicopters in areas where Hamas fighters are active, performing emergency surgery under fire, loading up wounded soldiers, and flying them to safety. The survival rates speak for themselves. Soldiers who might have been lost in previous conflicts are making it home because 669 is flying into what most people would consider impossible missions. But it's not all soldiers on the ground in Gaza, or maybe I should say not all human soldiers. Meet Oketz, Israel's Canine Special Forces unit. The dogs are trained for up to 2 years to detect booby traps, find tunnel entrances, and even search for survivors in collapsed buildings. They're equipped with tiny cameras that stream live video back to their handlers. And for Gaza, they've got these specially designed protective booties for the dogs because the urban rubble can cut their paws. Each dog works with a specific handler, and the bond between them is legendary. Oketz dogs crawl through tunnels, check to see if buildings are rigged to explode, search areas where human soldiers can't safely go. The dogs have been instrumental in finding tunnel entrances that would have been nearly impossible for humans to detect. And while they may look like they're having fun, just look at those tails wagging, these furry fighters are engaged in serious business. Both handlers and dogs have been wounded or lost in action. But many soldiers say that in the middle of all the intensity, seeing a determined dog doing its job brings a little bit of light to an otherwise heavy situation. And finally, there's the IDF unit that is not caught on camera. Here's the thing about modern military operations. For every dramatic rescue or tunnel operation, there's an invisible digital campaign happening behind the scenes. Enter 8200, Israel's cyber and signals intelligence unit, known in Hebrew as 8200. What is signals intelligence? Well, it ranges from monitoring radio signals, phone calls, and text messages to intercepting data from radars and missiles. Now, officially established in 1952, 8200's roots go back to the 1930s, but the unit really only started to take its modern form after Israel suffered the surprise attack that started the Yom Kippur War. After that massive intelligence failure, Israel's intelligence units underwent a major overhaul. An overhaul that eventually propelled 8200 to the forefront of Israeli intelligence and technological innovation. Today, 8200 is the IDF's largest intelligence unit, with an estimated 5,000 members, widely regarded as on par with the NSA in everything except scale. But 8200 has become something bigger than just a military unit. It's a cultural phenomenon in Israel. Over 40% of Israeli unicorn startups, those valued at over $1 billion, have at least one founder who's a 8200 alum. 8200 is like the Harvard of Israeli tech, a prestigious credential that opens doors throughout the tech sector and helped establish Israel's reputation as the startup nation. 8200's most famous public operations include a virus that infiltrated Iran's nuclear program and uncovering an ISIS plot to take out a civilian airliner. In Gaza, 8200 is providing crucial real-time intelligence through signals intercepts and cyber operations. So when Hamas commanders try to communicate, 8200 is trying to intercept those communications. And now 8200 has joined the AI revolution, using advanced AI tools like the Fire Factory to process vast amounts of data, generating high-value target lists and optimizing strike schedules. 8200 analysts work around the clock tracking high-value targets and disrupting Hamas's ability to coordinate operations. But the big question is, where will 8200 go next? Just as the unit was transformed after the Israeli intelligence community failed to stop the Yom Kippur War, it remains to be seen how the failure of October 7th will change Israeli intelligence. What we can be sure of is that as this conflict continues to evolve, all of these units, and those like them, will continue to adapt to carry out the D in Israel Defense Forces.